Morning, everyone. This session has really turned into be one of the stellar components of our conference over the last few years, and today will certainly be no exception. We have some outstanding speakers, some outstanding thoughts to be presented. So, as you are, I am very anxious to hear what our speakers, the messages they have to deliver. I'd like to ask Dan Cinelli to come up from Perkins Eastman. Dan was kind enough to sponsor AJAS Speaks today. Dan and his company have been stellar supporters of our association, so I thought I would ask him just to say a couple of words and kick us off.
Thank you, Don. This is the third year of AJAS Speaks, and I'm just thrilled to be able to sponsor this, and it was so powerful, the message from the last 2 years, and this is what it's all about. I've been doing this for 40 years and working with a lot of you and a lot of not-for-profits, and it's about these stories. It's about these things that enrich our lives, and it gets to the root of why we do what we do. And so let's keep doing why we do what we do with the same passion we had 40 years ago. So I'm going to turn this over to Carol. Thank you very much.
Good morning. It is my privilege to be chairing AJAS Speaks again. This is, as Dan and Don both mentioned, our third year. And we have, I think, evolved quite a bit since our initial year. We started out with the concept of a TED Talk. Our committee talked about it. What was that going to be like? What were we going to do? And the first year, we had a lot of people telling sort of a variety of personal stories. Last year, I think our stories became even more involved and sophisticated, and our presentations more polished. And this year, I think we took it another step, and we decided to create a theme for AJAS Speaks, and not just ask people to come and talk about what resonated with them, but really to think about things that were all related to one theme. And we started with, I guess, one of the things that I often talk about, which is what I call, my shorthand is the why Jewish question. I start out with the question of why Jewish organizations are different, why it is different for us to work in Jewish organizations, what makes this all resonate. And as we talked about it, we realized that the central element that unifies all of this is really the question of values. So each of our speakers has done very unique presentations this morning that focus on the topic of values. I am not going to read you their full bios. Each of them has extensive and quite interesting biographies. They're all in your program book. But I'm going to tell you very briefly about them, and I'll tell you a tiny bit about what they're going to educate us about this morning. So our first speaker this morning is Randy Kammer. Randy retired from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida in 2011, and she is a very active member of the board at River Garden in Jacksonville, Florida, and she's a brand new member, as of a few minutes ago, of our association board. Randy's talk this morning is going to be really themed around mitzvot, something that all of us know about, but Randy's going to tell us in a unique way that I hope all of us will take to heart. So please join me in welcoming Randy Kammer.
Good morning, and I didn't know the lights were going to be this bright. They're pretty bright. If you asked me what happened to me in September 1997, I wouldn't be able to tell you. My memory was erased during that month. And I'm going to tell you why before I end today, I promise. But be assured that it forms the basis of my feelings of mitzvot. When someone not of the Jewish faith asks me, what does it mean to be a Reformed Jew? I say to them, God put us on earth to be good people, to do good deeds every single day. We have to earn our existence because, in my opinion, there's no afterlife, just this one. Now, I know many Jews believe in an afterlife, but whether you are Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox, or anything in between, because we have all these new ones, I believe that that simple statement of doing good is true for everyone. Many people know that there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah. But what most people don't know, or what many people don't know, including me, before I started researching this topic, is of those 613, 365 are negative. Thou shalt not, you shalt not. Some of them are pretty obvious, like not taking the Lord's name in vain or not having sex with animals. Others are a little less obvious, and they are anathema to modern life. For example, the prohibition against shaving one's beard, or not living your life by the stars. Astrology, anyone? I have several friends who consider themselves very Jewish, but they're very into astrology. Others are very, very violent, and others are totally incomprehensible to me. You cannot offer the blemished sacrifice of a Gentile, or eat the first fruits of Jerusalem outside of Jerusalem. What do those even mean? But I'm here today to focus on the good mitzvot. And in the Torah, the first mitzvah is to believe in no other God but our God. That's pretty obvious. But most Jewish scholars, and many Jews in general, believe that the most important mitzvah is the mitzvah of tzedakah. In fact, some Jewish sages have said that those who do not perform tzedakah are the equivalent to idol worshipers. Many people mistakenly believe that tzedakah means charity, but it means righteousness, fairness, and justice. The most important thing is that all Jews have an obligation to give tzedakah regardless of your personal circumstances. That's very important to remember. And tzedakah is the key to being a Jew. I understand that it's an obligation, and you have to decide what that obligation involves. So now that we have established, I hope, that tzedakah and mitzvot are interchangeable, please excuse me if I move back and forth between the two of them. But understand that all Jews, and in fact, in my opinion, all human beings, have an obligation to fulfill the mission of Tikkun Olam. Heal the world. That's what we're here for. That's what we must do. We know that Jews love lists. Just look at the litany of sins to which we confess at Yom Kippur. I didn't even know what xenophobia meant until I was in high school. So now there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah, but there also are 8 levels of tzedakah. And they range from enabling self-reliance, which is the highest level, to giving begrudgingly, which is the lowest level. I'm not really a good rule follower. Is that a surprise for anyone who knows me? So I believe that tzedakah and mitzvot are very personal to an individual's value system and beliefs. For example, if you call a sick friend or one who's grieving or suffering a loss, that's a mitzvah. It only takes a few minutes. Or you can donate and volunteer your time to a worthwhile charity or non-for-profit organization, say, I don't know, your local nursing home. And that's definitely a mitzvah. If you have special skills, like I do, I knit. I know it's kind of archaic, although I did see one of the rabbis knitting yesterday, so that was good. And I make nursing home lap blankets so that people are warm in wheelchairs in their beds for our local nursing home. I think I've made 60 of them thus far. I also make baby blankets for the children and now grandchildren of my friends. So that's something that I can do. I think the most highest level of a mitzvot is doing something where you know what the recipient's name is, but they don't know yours. And I've always believed that that should also involve not telling anybody what you've done. It's not important that you've done it, it's important what you've done. But today, because I have just described to you levels of mitzvot that are in my comfort zone, whether it's calling a friend, giving money, volunteering, or knitting, it's the most important mitzvot is the one that's outside of your comfort zone. So I'm going to tell you all a story and violate my rule about bragging about something I've done that illustrates what you can do to leave your comfort zone. During the Christmas holidays, our local newspaper, as I'm sure many of your local newspapers do, has something called the Hope Fund. People donate money, and the agencies that are responsible for distributing those funds distribute them to needy people whose stories are featured in the paper over a 3-week period of time. This past year, one story really struck me. It was a story of a 90-year-old African-American woman who had recently lost her husband. She lost a daughter to cancer, and she was estranged from her other daughter who had mental illness. She had also recently suffered some serious health problems. And the article said that after paying her mortgage, some months she had $3 left. And that really struck me, because my dad, who is still alive, thank goodness, is 91 years old. He's still practicing law part-time. And he has all his faculties, he's in great health, and so his story was so different and so much more privileged than this woman. So I really took that to heart. So I looked up her address in whitepages.com. I'm not totally technologically incompetent. And I decided to prepare a basket of fresh and shelf foods to take to her. I found out she lived in a neighborhood I had never been in Jacksonville. And I admit some trepidation as I was following my GPS instructions to get to her home. I was worried about going to someone's home as a stranger and violating her personal space. Well, there was really no reason to worry. I was greeted so warmly with a hug as soon as I got there. She knew about this story, but she had never seen it because she could not afford to subscribe to the newspaper. So I gave her my copy of the story. We sat and talked for a really long time. I learned a really lot about her, but I didn't tell her that much about myself. At the end of our visit, I asked her, could I pay her mortgage for the next month? She was stunned and very, very grateful. But I explained to her the concept of mitzvot and that I was really doing something good for myself. And so I was on a real high for a long time after that. I know that most of you in this room, by definition, do mitzvot every single day. So no pun intended, I'm preaching to the choir. But you should ask yourself, are you doing everything that you can? And if you're not, just do it. How many of you have organized programs in your nursing home to allow your residents to perform mitzvot? This is the concept, two concepts of tzedakah and mitzvot, giving with the hand and giving with the heart. At River Garden, we asked volunteers to bag food for animal shelters. It was a big success. I know that a lot of you have done similar programs, and I urge you to form a community of tzedakah by sharing those ideas and sharing those programs. I'm going to read now. I promised Carol I would memorize. I'm doing my best, Carol. But I need to read some statistics because I want to get them right. And honestly, I am too technologically incompetent to do that. So, the 2013 Pew Research study on American Jewry, with which most of us are familiar, found that 69% of respondents found it essential to lead a moral and ethical life. Jews are a very small portion of the world's population. According to Pew, about 2.2% of Americans identify as Jewish, or about 5.3 million. Outside of major U.S. population centers, the Jewish population is often less than 2%. Yet we constitute a disproportionate number of leaders of nonprofits and philanthropic organizations. The Pew study found that 56% of respondents believed it essential to work for justice. Now, I have to tell you, since the election, I believe this is much higher. And I was surprised at how low it was back then. Business Week's 2006 list of the 50 most generous philanthropists in America included at least 15 Jews. A recent edition of the Chronicle of Philanthropy found that even though Jews only constitute 2% of the American population, they constitute 30% of America's most generous donors. The American philanthropic tradition can be traced not only to the Torah and to Maimonides, but to the first charitable trust established in England by law in 1601. All of these statistics represent people who are setting examples for us, for our children, and for our grandchildren. This kind of modeling for our children is so critical, and it's something we do all the time. What about that weekly contribution at Sunday school or Sabbath school? When I was growing up, it was called Karen and Me. We also take our children to soup kitchens, and my grandson plays a video game called Animal Jam. Any of you have kids addicted to that game? But his screen name that he chose himself was Sadaka 23. This kind of modeling is why I'm proud to be a Jew. It's just one of the reasons, but it's so important for our next generation. When I started today, I told you that I would tell you what happened to me in September 1997. I was invited to a party of the local graduates and current class of Leadership Florida. I'm sure all of your states and cities have leadership programs. I was privileged to have been a graduate of class 12 of that program. Originally, the only Jews slated to be at the party were the host and myself. At the very last minute, the host decided to invite his best friend, a Jewish doctor, because he wanted him to be there. There was lots of food, and even though the guy had no connection to Leadership Florida, he asked him to come. After 25 years of eating little or no red meat, I had become a carnivore in earnest. I was so thrilled to find filet mignon on the buffet. So I asked for a knife to cut the filet, and I was told, oh, it's like butter. It's so soft. You don't need a knife to cut it. And I said, okay, great. So I had a plate, and I was standing there eating and talking, as usual, big surprise. And all of a sudden, a piece of meat slid down my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't make a sound. And by the way, if someone's choking and they can make the sound of choking, they're not choking, because you cannot make a sound. And I was struggling to breathe. So I ran to the nearest powder room, and I was followed by my then boyfriend. I stood looking in the mirror, and I mouthed, "Help me." Lest anyone doesn't believe I'm a Jewish American princess, my last thought as my body systems were shutting down was, oh my God, this outfit's from Saks and I'm peeing in it. That's the God's honest truth. So I collapsed on the floor and I was unconscious. So everything from that point on is what I was told. My eyes had rolled back in my head. I was clinically dead because the powder room was too small for anyone to pick me up and give me the Heimlich maneuver. So the cries of my boyfriend were met by the host and his Jewish doctor friend, who showed up with a long iced teaspoon, those of you not from the South, long spoon, and a knife in one hand. He jammed the teaspoon into my windpipe and I started breathing again. He was prepared to do a tracheotomy. I must tell you, he's an OBGYN. So I didn't wake up and the ambulance came. And when I woke up in the ambulance, there was some guy slapping me, yelling, "Wake up, Randy, wake up." And I heard him say to my boyfriend, well, she's awake, but she's not opening her eyes. So when we got in the emergency room, I opened my eyes, and leaning over me was a nurse who had been badly disfigured in a fire. And I thought, okay, as a Reformed Jew, I have never believed in the concept of hell, but maybe I was wrong. The only two physical consequences of that day were a broken sternum from the CPR and a total loss of memory for the 2 weeks before and after the event. And I can tell you how I know that because I got a call 6 months later from someone saying, "Aren't you coming to speak at our conference?" And I said, "What conference?" And I said, "When did you ask me?" And it was the week before that had happened. So I knew the memory was gone. The next day I went to the doctor's house with a bottle of Dom Perignon, because what do you give someone who saves your life? And his wife opened the door and said, "Oh my God, you were dead last night." You know, I actually said I'm not dead anymore, but the doctor told everybody that when he turned me over, my grandfather's tie, which I wear a lot of the time, fell out of my blouse. And he thought, "Oh my God, she's Jewish, and I'm going to lose her." When we were at the hospital, the EMTs told us that they almost never save a choking victim because the average choking victim is dead in 5 minutes, and their average response time is 6 minutes. So since that day, I have vowed to do a mitzvah each and every day. I believe that God gave me a second chance to do good and to do it as many good deeds as I can. And I hope that I have the physical wherewithal to do it for a really long time. But I also believe she gave me a second chance to be with you today, and I thank you.
So Randy told you that I told everybody they had to memorize it. Lest any of you think I'm not a terrible chair, I was like the slave driver on all of them, but all of them were incredible, Randy included, and you are seeing the product of that today. We have some remarkable stories to tell. Our next speaker is someone who is very special to me. When I was working at Cedar Village in Cincinnati, I had the great gift of being involved with the Jewish Foundation of Cincinnati's fellowship program. They created a fellowship program with Hebrew Union College, and they placed and still place rabbinical students in our Jewish community organization for a year, really, of what I'll call servant leadership. The first student I had the great privilege of supervising is here today to speak with us. Her name is AJAS Pillsbury, and she will be ordained in a month on May 20th, which I'm very excited about, and I will be there cheering her on. She's a very remarkable young woman who is one of the deepest thinkers and most thoughtful people I have ever had the pleasure to know, and I really wanted her here because I think her perspectives are quite meaningful to all of us, and she's going to talk to us about journeys.
So this is really loud, sorry. I'm not used to this. So once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a young rabbi who studied for many years and dreamed of becoming the greatest teacher in her generation. So she left her school and walked and came to a small town with a small Beit Midrash, a small school, with plenty of students and a little inn. And so every day she would go to the school and she would teach about the importance of humility and kindness and what it takes to build a community and how we all have to be responsible for each other. And each night she would return to the woman and this little inn. And the first night of her stay, the woman prepared a simple meal. The rabbi ate it. It was great. The next day, she also cleared her plate, ate the whole meal. But the next day, on the third night of the visit, the innkeeper decided to try something new. So she did a little something special with the food, but the rabbi didn't really like it. So she covered her hand with her plate after trying it and lied and said, I'm not hungry. I already ate. But the innkeeper knew what was happening, and she was hurt. She wanted to share something special with the rabbi. So she called her out on the lie and said, "Rabbi, how come every day you teach that you should always leave food on your plate? And yet, when it comes to you, you only leave food on your plate when you don't actually want to eat it. It's not because of regard for your teaching or what you say is important to you." And the rabbi just sat there sorry, packed her things, and ran away. So she walked, and eventually she came across a field with a trampled path running through it. So she took the path and walked across the field, and as she was walking, all of a sudden a little girl cried out to her and said, "Rabbi, Rabbi, what are you doing? Why are you trampling our harvest? Don't you know that's what we live on? That's our food." And the rabbi looked down and said, "This is a path. Aren't paths made for walking?" But the little girl looked at her and said, "Yes, robbers like you have trampled it." The rabbi apologized and ran away. And so she walked, and eventually she heard about this amazing city of legend where everything you could ever want was there. So she walked, and she finally came to the crossroads. And she knew one way led to this amazing city, but the other way led to a maze of paths and gardens that were right next to the city, but you would never actually be able to get inside. So she stopped and wondered who to ask, but there was no one there. There was just a small child playing with their toys on the side of the road. So feeling kind of dumb, the rabbi went up to the small child and said, "Do you know which path is the way to the miraculous city of legend?" And the child nodded and said, that way is short and long. And that path, the one over there, that one is long and short." So the rabbi thanked the child and decided to take the path that was short and long. So she walked, and all there were gardens and mazes and paths. So she kept walking, and eventually she found herself back at the very same crossroads with this small child. But now she was tired and hungry and pretty annoyed with this kid. So she went up to the child and said, "Didn't you say that path was the short one?" But the child just smiled and said, "Did I not also say that it was the long one?" And the rabbi stopped in her tracks, astounded. And she thought about the woman in the inn and the little girl in the field and the child standing right in front of her. And all of a sudden she realized she'd gotten it all wrong. She had been so focused on her own mistakes and the shame it made her feel and running away as far away and as fast as possible that she had forgotten what she was really doing and why it all mattered. She thought of the woman at the inn, and yes, she apologized, she paid her fare, and she left. But what did she do to make amends? It had never occurred to the rabbi to say, "You know what, I'm sorry, let me try your food again. What was it that you added today? You know, your inn is really beautiful. I'm impressed with your business sense." And then she thought of the little girl in the field. It had never occurred to her to say, "What can I do to help safeguard your field in the future? How can I make sure this doesn't continue to happen?" And then there was this small child in front of her. She'd been so focused on trying to get to her destination, on her ego, on her promise, on her career, that she never thought to ask, "Small child, why are you here all alone? Where are your parents? Do you have enough to eat? Do I need to help you? What's happening here?" She had completely forgotten that the long way is the short way, and the short way is the long way. When my grandmother died, my grandfather was devastated. He had not gone to temple regularly, more than Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, since his children were children. But as soon as my grandmother died, every single week, he and his best friend were at their temple saying Kaddish for their dead wives. Now, both of these men have been making fun of me my entire life for being into Judaism. They are lifelong Jews. They fought in World War II, love Israel, love Judaism, and yet my grandfather in particular loves to tell me how the Bible is a bunch of magical BS, is a travesty to women and immigrants, and every Passover, he always says, whenever we talk about the parting of the Red Sea, he stops everyone and says, you know what? There was no parting of the Red Sea. Really, the IDF had hidden planes in Egypt, and they built a pontoon bridge, and then once the Israelites crossed it, they bombed it. And that's why the Israeli army is so good now, because they've always been amazing. He's that kind of person. And yet, when his whole world collapsed, he turned to Judaism. And so I asked Poppy and his best friend, why are you doing this? You don't believe in this. What does it give you? And at first, they didn't really have an answer. They just said, this is what I do. This is how I show the world and myself that I love her. She's important to me. This is just what you do. And it didn't really make sense to me. But then I kept thinking about it and how our rituals and Judaism, our temples, this is the one place where you can go and share your pain. This was a place where my grandfather and his friends could publicly show everyone that they missed their wives, that they honored these women who had fed them and clothed them and raised their children, who had created a whole life so that they could do the things they wanted to do. And this was how he honored the transition from husband to widower. An entire life shared. He no longer goes to temple every week to say Kaddish for her. It's been more than 10 years. But he goes and visits her grave whenever he can. And usually it ends up being on Shabbat, on Saturday. Not because it's Shabbat, but just it feels right to him. It's who he is. And when he goes, he just stands in front of her and tells her all the little things, what it means to be a spouse. He tells her what he had for breakfast and where he's going out to dinner and what all the grandchildren are doing. And he tells her he loves her and he misses her. And then he leaves flowers and he stands there. And then he goes back to his everyday life because he knows that the long way is the short way, and the short way is the long way. And the truth is, we all have hurts we carry. We all have so many pain and insecurity that we cover up and we protect. And these things can layer one on top of the other and can push us aside from all the people we care about and who care about us. They can stop us from being able to create a community and really come together. But they don't have to. In fact, Judaism and the texts of our tradition speak to the realities, the real pain, the real suffering, and the joy of our existence. And we can use these stories. We can bring them into our communities, our daily lives, and we can retell them, and we can change them, and we can make them our own, and we can create texts and materials that help us interact with the darkness and the scariness and help bring us together so that we can all remember and all appreciate that the long way is the short way, and the short way is the long way.
Our third presentation this morning is the first time we're having a dynamic duo speaking. All of us, I think, know Gary Weiss. Gary Weiss has been a member of our organization for a very long time. He's been in the field of aging services for 40 years, and he really is a leader and an inspiration to many of us. His daughter, Sarah, whom maybe many of you have gotten to know this week, is also a leader and an inspiration at a different point in her career. Sarah is the executive director of the Center of Holocaust and Humanity Education in Cincinnati, and has also served a dual role as the executive director of the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council. I had spoken to both Gary and Sarah about the opportunity to speak together and talk about not just their values, but the value of Jewish communal leadership and how it translates l'dor vador from generation to generation. Please join me in welcoming Gary and Sarah.
What a wonderful introduction, and this means a lot to me because, as Carol indicated, it's been 40 years since I started my career, and many warm memories, many warm memories with many of you. You're the professionals who have made a difference in my life, your community's lives, and most of all, the commitments that you make every day for the mitzvot that you give to your residents, tenants, community, however you want to define your communities, it makes a difference. Today my story is very personal. It involves me, it involves my daughter, my grandmother, her grandmother. It starts out with this ring. Now that's a beautiful ring. I always wear it. I rarely take it off. The reason why I rarely take it off is because my grandmother presented it to me in 1970 when she came from Israel. She's a survivor of the Holocaust, but she flew in for Israel for my graduation. And she really didn't give me much, but I was the oldest grandson, and I was always the one that she kind of leaned on. And there was a love, there was a genuine love and a bond. There was a commitment every day when she saw me and cared about me. She gets off the plane, she hands me the ring, Ze bishlicha. That means in Hebrew, this is for you. And I'm thinking, I'm 18 years old, 17 years old. It's a beautiful ring. I look at my mother, I look at my dad. I said, Toda Rabah. What can I say? I didn't know how to respond to that. But it touched me. I have vivid memories of her one-bedroom apartment in Israel when I visited. And she had her bedroom, she had a couch, I would sleep there. It was very, very small, but it was by the beach. That was a good thing. I'll lead you to that story, but at any rate, she always made sure that I ate. God forbid a Jewish grandma wouldn't give you some food. Every morning, I would hear the clutter in the kitchen. She would be getting sardines out, eggs, fresh cucumbers, fresh tomatoes, the vegetables that all Israelis eat, cheeses, you name it, she had it out. But the smell of the coffee really is what I have memories about with her and how it tasted. She was my inspiration, and she started my juices thinking about the elderly and the love that she showed me throughout her life. And it was constant. And I never forgot that. I'm a Sabra. I was born in Israel. We came here in 1961. I didn't speak English. Had a rocky road in terms of adjusting to the United States, because when you don't speak English, and you're 9.5, people can be cruel. Not intentionally, but they can be. And I missed Israel. But the main thing that I take from my grandmother, who lived and passed away in Israel, is her commitment and love for family. That was profound, that was important to her, and that meant everything to the family. I can't say enough about my grandmother, because she was not a woman of many words, but she was a woman of action. She would do things to make you feel good. And that touched me.
I too have a special piece of jewelry. These pearls, which I wear often, belong to my grandmother, Genya Weiss, a Holocaust survivor, the daughter of Machla Chepelunsky, my father's grandmother. Like so many others whose lives were impacted by the Shoah, her world was turned upside down when she was just a teenager. The Nazis came into her community, Oshmane, Lithuania, which is today in Belarus. They took her father, the husband of Machla, and murdered him along with hundreds of others. Shortly after that, the surviving family members were deported to a ghetto and later slave labor camps, and ultimately liberated by the Russian army at the concentration camp of Stutthof. She was 20 years old. We often think about liberation as this moment of hope, of rebirth, of life. But it was a bittersweet moment, because it was the moment the survivors realized what they had lost and didn't have, and no homes to go to. However, like so many others, she went on to rebuild her life. But my father and I only knew the story, only knew our family history through silence. Silence best depicted by this painting by another survivor named Samuel Bach. But despite the loss and horrors, as I said, she went on to rebuild her life. First, by moving to Israel and meeting my grandfather, Leo Weiss, another survivor, and having my father. And they started over again, as you heard, in the early 1960s, when they chose to move the family and start over again in the United States. Despite the losses, they moved on. And these pearls remind me of her strength and her perseverance to overcome unimaginable horrors. Many of us who know survivors know that they say they survived because of luck. But we also know it is because of their perseverance, their fortitude, their unwillingness to give up. And what we learned from them is they did not allow these experiences to destroy, defeat, or weaken them. I am of the generation, the third generation, a generation the Nazis couldn't even envision, a generation that was never supposed to exist. And I remember every day how lucky I am to be here. And because of that, the importance of leading a life of purpose and meaning. Our grandmothers are Holocaust survivors. We bear a mark as the second generation, not a mark of shame, not a mark of honor, but something that's in our souls and our consciousness always. And despite our family's silence, that past connects us to our work in the present.
My grandmother Machla really got me started in this field. And I'll tell you what happened. I graduated high school in '70. I was going to Ohio State University. I was majoring in business at that time. Went to classes. I wasn't sure, at 18 years old, how mature are you? I know I wasn't. Keith was, but I wasn't. But what gravitated me was the elderly. And in the spring of 1971, I came home for the summer. I got interested in healthcare, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I called Sidney Lewine. Some of you may know him, some of you may don't. He was the executive director of Mount Sinai Hospital in Cleveland. And I asked for a tour and to talk to him a little bit about what hospital administration could be like. We talked. I got a tour. Very nice hospital. I'm sure it was excellent care, but I wasn't comfortable. Very impersonal, very impersonal. Clutter, people running around. I just felt this wasn't for me. So went back home. I had a friend. She talked a little bit with me and said, why don't you go talk to Howard Bram? Who's Howard Bram? Howard Bram was the executive director of Manor Park, and he was an institution there for many, many years. Wonderful leader. Some of you may know him, remember him. Fortunately, he passed away. He should rest in peace. He was the builder, Herb Shorewood Builders, of our association. And he referred me to North Texas State, but before that, I wanted a tour of Manor Park. So he calls his assistant, Paul Boxbaum. I still remember the names. It's unbelievable. And we walked through Manor Park. I was touched by Manor Park. I sensed a lot of feelings there with the staff. I sensed a lot of caring with the staff. I sensed a lot of touching. Tactile relationships are very important with people. It's called acceptance. I asked for a job, so I worked there 3 summers as an orderly, different shifts. Let me tell you, I saw some things, oy vey. I'm 19 years old, I'm 20 years old, you know. It's unbelievable. But at any rate, I met a man by the name of Joseph Bauer who was a resident there. He was 82 at the time. And Mr. Bauer and I struck a relationship. And he told me his story about how he was admitted to Manor Park. He didn't have any family, he didn't have any money, he didn't have nothing, garnished. They took him in, they took care of him, no questions asked. And he told me that story, and that's the way he basically described it. And again, that started to build my interest in working with the elderly. And it was really the genesis of my desire to go into long-term care, and also the nonprofit world, the Jewish communal work that we do. Because we take care of people first, worry about the money second. He gave me a note that still hangs in my office, and it reads, "Your influence at Manor Park represents a process of life that communicates a great eagerness in the lives and happiness of the elderly. You reflect the kind of works the doctor of gerontology must capitalize in to make his brand of medicine work significantly." That touched me immensely, and I've never forgotten that. I never forgot the direction I went, which has been a wonderful career. We've all been knocked down plenty, but it's not how many times we get knocked down, it's how many times we get up. And you know who said that? Eddie Robinson. Does anybody know who Eddie Robinson is? Eddie Robinson that's right. He was the coach at Grambling for many, many years. He was the institution there. And he advocated for African-American football players to not only be the best they can be as football players, but the best they can be as human beings. I think he sent over 200 of his students to the pros. And they're all very successful people, by the way. Many of them, I should say. That's an inspiration. I said that at Jesse's bar mitzvah. And it's true. It's true. For some reason, I always liked him. And the reason is because I've been knocked down plenty, but I've always gotten up. Our field, our commitment to the elderly is perpetual, and it never should end. We are fighting forces beyond our control. It's called government. And everybody knows how much I love government. To say the least, I'm getting there. The boss is telling me to get on with the story. I just want to end by thanking everybody. You really do God's work. You really do the right thing. You really care about your communities, your residents, your families, your staff. We're all family. I want to thank Herb Shore. He was a legend. He was the builder of this association as well as Jewish Aging Services. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Howard Bram. I want to thank everybody. And I want to tell you, I'm very proud that my grandmother got me inspired to go into this field. But what I'm proudest of is standing to my left, my daughter, because she's perpetuating the memory of 6 million Jews.
We're not done. Because I have to tell you what inspired me. Actually, some of my fondest childhood memories are of my Saturday mornings at Heritage Manor. I learned a lot about life in the halls of Heritage Manor. In the kitchen, I learned how to make matzo ball soup and all sorts of delicious food. In the sanctuary, I learned about the importance of faith at any age. And in the rooms of residence, I learned that candy, especially chocolate, has the power to cross generational bounds. I also learned what it means to be a truly committed Jewish professional by watching my father in action. I still think fondly and am inspired by the way in which I saw his commitment to Heritage Manor and to ensuring that the residents there had a warm, safe, loving home. It still inspires me to this day. While I didn't go directly into the family business, I did want a career with deep meaning and purpose. And I've had the privilege for more than a decade of working in the Cincinnati Jewish community, specifically, as Carol mentioned, as the director of the Center for Holocaust and Humanity Education, where I'm honored to ensure that the memory of those who were murdered, along with those who survived, inspire future generations to stand up against injustice, against inhumanity, against intolerance in our world today. I believe very deeply it's the experiences from Heritage Manor, from our grandmothers, that inspire me in my career as a Jewish professional. Our work is a legacy to our grandmothers and the many diamonds we have gleaned from the residents of Cedar Village and the pearls of wisdom from the survivors of the Holocaust. Each of us have rings and necklaces and special pieces of artifacts that bind us to the past. And it is our responsibility to ensure that those memories, that the wisdom of the elderly becomes an inheritance to all of humankind. Thank you. Good job.
So before I introduce our last speaker, I will tell you that when I called Gary and I called Sarah individually to ask them to do this, they both said exactly the same sentence with exactly the same intonation. And both of them said, it would be my honor. And clearly it is our honor to have had them here today, as with all of our speakers. Thank you. Our final speaker this morning is Dan Cinelli. Dan is a dear friend and colleague to many of us. We're very grateful that Perkins Eastman is helping to sponsor our AJAS Speaks this morning. And Dan is going to talk about values in a different way. He's going to talk about values with respect to the work that we do, not just from a Jewish perspective, but in the world of aging services. Dan.
This is really tough because I'm not using any PowerPoint, any images. This is all about me talking. First question I have of you is, how many of you are boomers? Raise your hand. Raise it real high. So most of this talk I'm going to talk to you about is about the boomers. But how I got here today was roughly about a year ago at this meeting. We had just had Peter Yarrow singing songs, and people were singing, and people got on stage, and there was hugging, and then we had a Q&A session. And I think Don called for the last question, and in the way in the back of the room, I raised my hand and I said, Mr. Yarrow, I said, you know, we all love Peter, Paul, and Mary songs. We love that time. We love to be able to sing the songs. And the songs are about righting wrong for the most part, right, in terms of what they make us feel about. And I said, where did all of that activism, where did all that social change go? And he stopped and he paused and sort of like I was looking at the rest of all of you. And I think you all had the same answer. The answer is it's gone dormant, and we are all just sort of carry on with our lives. So that was really powerful to me to be able to sort of walk out of that meeting and think about this social change that was in us. And so I spent last year sort of visiting and talking with a lot of family, a lot of friends, a lot of partners, a lot of clients, a lot of board members about this social change that we have. Clearly, the election that we just went through really sort of lit the spark about some things that we feel about. And clearly, the Saturday after the inauguration, seeing my granddaughter walking in Washington, D.C. with her mom and with her grandmother was inspiring to me. But as the minister said yesterday, there is so much to do. How do you choose your social action? How do you choose going forward of being able to make a difference and to sort of bring back that activism spirit? So in having those conversations with a lot of people, we've sort of gradually talked about what does the boomer want? What does the boomer think about as we look towards getting old? And so I had a lot of conversations starting with my wife, with my brother, with friends, good friends, talking about, you know, what is ageism and how does that relate to social change about what we want? And I sort of thought about, for the longest time, you talk about values. We have all done a tremendous job, we collectively together, doing things for the aged, doing things in our community, making great communities. But my premise here today, and what I'm going to tell you, is that for us to be able to catch up, to be able to meet the expectations of what we want, can't wait for 15 years, can't wait for 10 years. We have to start wrestling with it now, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to do it. But let me tell you two quick stories about that sort of give you a perspective about who I am, so you can sort of see where I'm coming from. 40 years ago, 1977, I was a young architect in a small architectural office. John Maxheim, he did CJE, he did some other projects. He was a Holocaust survivor. He came into the office and said, "We won this great job, and you're going to be leading this project." So he told me about the project, and I sort of put myself into perspective. If I were to go talk to a 25-year-old in my office right now and tell them that they were leading this project, they would have said I'm crazy. But, you know, I was eager, I was immortal. Yeah, that sounds like a great job. So you know what my job was? My job was to go and turn a 400,000 square foot, 64-year-old abandoned tuberculosis center sitting on 156 acres in the middle of the city of Chicago and convert it into affordable housing. Do you compute all that? I was like, okay. So another architect and we spent 3 months measuring, because there was no drawings of these buildings, 7 or 8 hospital buildings. And, you know, when we were doing this, by the way, the hospital was totally furnished. It had been shut for 45 years. So all of this stuff was there. So as we were measuring this stuff, and as we drew up these immense plans of surgical rooms and 6-bed wards and sunrooms and all the things that were important to sort of tuberculosis design back then, we started thinking about how are we going to be able to get, even if they're affordable seniors, to move into this building. So we started doing some research, and back then, there's no internet, so you start going and reading books about hospital design in the US. That doesn't cover anything. You looked at UK and Scandinavian sort of stuff, and that didn't have anything because it was all scary, modern, and spooky looking stuff. So what we said was, we have to really scratch our heads and put this together. So again, this is before ADA, before Fair Housing Act. But we knew that there was something different between multifamily housing and sort of aging housing. So we got some tape and we started measuring and putting things in, and we got 2 wheelchairs, we got 2 walkers, and we started creating these apartments inside this. So fast forward, almost 2 years later, 180 apartments were constructed, and Mayor cut the ribbon. But the most powerful thing to me was going about 3 weeks later and being able to do some punch list and meeting 2 residents who've moved in. And I started to talk to them about, where did you come from? Did you come from an apartment? And they were, and they just said this was wonderful. It was the most amazing. And they said, we know you did something different here because we can feel it when we walk around this place, that you knew something about us. You knew something special. Talk about lighting the fuse for the next 40 years of always trying to figure out a way to be able to advance and to change and to make that. So what happened was that 60s and 70s activism went inside me, and it kept going and kept going. Next story, 2004. 2004, my mother-in-law died of Alzheimer's. She had Alzheimer's for roughly 6 years. Her husband, who tried to take care of her in her home, he died of pancreatic cancer. So we pledged to him that we would take care of Betty, and we air ambulanced her back to Chicago, where she died 4 years later. Also, my wife's grandfather and grandmother also had died of dementia-related diseases. So Allison had this sort of bubble over her head about what's her dementia history, what's her future look like. And so I had this bubble go off in my head and saying, what we could probably do is, we've been doing great dementia household model units for a couple of years, and we see that they're making a difference. Why couldn't we take that information and all of that knowledge and actually put it into a single-family home that would allow people to age in place, and if they did get dementia, they could age in place cognitively. So I told this story to my other Perkins Eastman partners. They thought it was a great idea. We had a competition. We had international consultants. We went to Leading Age. They were involved in the project. Even Sheldon Goldberg, who was head of the Alzheimer's Association at the time, thought it was a fabulous idea. It was going to be a major game changer. 10 iterations of the design later, again, we're really into this thing. We create 300 touch points inside this house that will allow people to be able to, prevent incontinence, all these kinds of things. We had 2 65-year-old widows that took care of their husbands who had dementia and saw the house and said, this is amazing. I wish we would have had something like this when we were going through our caregiving mode. So we made a movie. It's roughly documenting the 4 years we took it. And 2,000 people watched this movie for 12 minutes. We knew it. We could actually identify it. And so we waited for the phone to ring, and we waited for the phone to ring, and we waited for the phone to ring. And no one called. No community, no person out there saying that they wanted to create this house. And so we started to reflect on why this happened. In fact, what we then learned was that people don't want to know if they get dementia. It's a reactive process. You might take luminosity and you might have other games and you might take some medication to maybe prevent it, but you don't want to be able to take a proactive stance to be able to allow you to age cognitively. So no one wanted to build it, move in, and wait 10 years to see if it really made a difference. So what it did for me is to say, why didn't I build it for myself? Why didn't I build this for Allison and I? Why didn't I build the house for Betty? And why don't we move into it? So that was sort of the relevancy of the rest of this talk is, in fact, what I did was designed for them and not us. So the 60s was all about all of us. You remember, you were people in social work, or Mark Wiener was in hospitals, and all these kinds of things. 40 years ago, we were all young Turks. We were all sort of like pushing the envelope. We were all thinking about we could make a difference in whatever we did. And we just sort of got on and go, okay, let's do another project. Let's do another program for them. So my thought is, what's going to happen to the boomers here? Are we slowly going to wake up one morning and we are now old? We are now them. And we're going to move into some other ageist box that someone else creates for us. So, you out there who are the smartest and brightest people in the industry, this is my call to action to you. People who are retiring, people who are transferring on to doing other things, I urge you to not walk away from this business. I urge you to start thinking about what is it we're going to create for the boomer generation, and we have to start doing it now. The largest demographic cohort in the United States history is going to be the boomers. And what I hear from all of you, I hear from board members, I hear from friends, I hear from family who are boomers, if it smells or tastes or feels like a CCRC life plan community, I'm not coming. So what do we do with all of this real estate that we've been sort of dealing with and enhancing and trying to make sure we keep the ball rolling? We keep constantly trying to feed the beast. So can we, as our call to our values, and on the cover of the AJAS, it talks about I, the Hillel thing about I. And I've been wrestling with that sort of that in-between. Can we start to do stuff for us? Can we start to think about what we want? Why do we have to wait until we're 85 and 90 years old to move into what we think we want to move to? I look at co-housing. I look at sort of the little twinkle of urban planning where people are moving downtown and being more intergenerational, being more thoughtful about each other. I talked to Amy, and you know, she and her husband were, there you are, you and her husband are a dilemma about, you know, do you move into a community that's music related or something else? So it's this thing that we're wrestling with. And so what we'll do is we'll keep wrestling with it and we'll just put it away and keep going. Why not do it now? Why not create something? Why not get together, start to think about it, have some tough conversations, and start to build what you will move into, what you want now. You can't do it. You can't wait 5 years. The youngest baby boomer will be here, start thinking about active adult in 5 years. We will not have enough time to build what we want to be able to do. So are you ready in the call to action to sort of program it, to build it, to replace it, to rethink it, to be able to do that now, and then sell your house in 3 years, sell your apartment, and move in, and then roll around in it and say, this is great, this is exactly what I want, and then call your college roommate, call your brother, have your kids move in, and start to really enjoy what you were putting off for another 10 to 20 years. What's wrong with that? Because if we don't, we're going to have a lot of abandoned senior living campuses that are a lot of all of campuses with people not wanting to move into. And when we finally get there, when we finally move in, you're going to start to tweet it. You're going to email people. You're going to make a video about it. You're going to go on the Today Show. You're going to have Ellen move in. You're going to have Brad Pitt come and visit you on a TV show. You're going to tell people that this is really important. This was something that we have to do. And there's this huge change that you can make. My call to action to you is about taking those Jewish values that you have, that you've served other people for years, and to be able to start using that information, that smartness that we all have, and to be able to start planning what we want to be tomorrow. Thank you very much.
That was just wonderful. As I say, every year it just gets better and better. Could I ask all of our presenters and Carol to come up for a moment? I think everybody deserves some applause. Bear with me 1 second. Just as a little token of our thanks and the thanks of the association, we have a stucco box for each of you. I think it's an appropriate gift this year. I actually hope you like the gifts. They all come from Israel this year, so kind of our new initiative. But this was absolutely everything. I think, Carol, you and I wanted it to be 3 years ago, and certainly has evolved that way, and we thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And we're running a few minutes behind. That's certainly fine. That's kind of what we do in life. So one more picture. So I'll have you move on to the next presentation. Meet up for lunch. Thank you all.